I'm Brandon Kennard, GoFarm, Cohort 9, North Shore location. And yesterday, after the last field day for AgXposure, I was speaking to several members of the cohort, and I was talking about posting a video. Um, I've gone through the entirety of the AgXcel application once with my own self-generated CSA shares. However, I just want to be very clear. I am not Daniel. I am not Caleb. And this is my first time, like many of you, going through a crop plan. So I wanted to post this video in case I could help somebody who's currently confused or stuck, or maybe wanted to walk through an example. I always found that very helpful in university. And I also wanted to receive critique on, the DTMs or, clarifications that others may have on harvest window questions or how to do the bed planning at the very end. But yeah, I thought that posting this video may be beneficial to encouraging conversation with the members of the cohorts. Also, if you want to jump around in this video, it should be a YouTube video, and I should have the timeline in the description, which should automatically populate timestamps on the video or like in the scroll wheel. So if you want to jump around, feel free to do so. If you have critiques, if you have comments, if you have questions, post it in the comments of the video or on the Google Groups discussion, wherever this is entered as the conversation. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first step is the CSA shares. So coming up with your CSA shares, and Talon just asked the question. Somebody else might respond to it before this gets posted, but my understanding, and I'll switch over to Sheets because I just copy and pasted. The only difference between this CSA share here that Daniel provided and this one is the ordering of the items in the share, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But my understanding of the CSA shares is that each share is what every member of your CSA gets for 1 week. So the first week of your CSA, everyone will get salad mix, arugula, turnips, chard, cucumbers, pak choy, flowers. Then the second week, they'll get share 2, and then so on and so forth. Something that helped me at least in coming up with these shares was looking at this guide. So I'll include all the docs that I refer to, which will be this Excel or this Sheets doc, and I might also include like an edited version of the crop list that we received from the workbook, but this should be enough to go off of. But yes, something that I found helpful was using the guide. So as Daniel recommended, we should include one type of green, one type of root, one cooking green, a vegetable fruit, an herb, and an edible flower. The Market Gardener does say most of the same things. It says to do 2 types of roots, but let's just stick with the GoFarm recommendation. If you want to get fancy, you can get fancy. But for me, I'm going to stick to what they said. I did add a cruciferous or green category though, because everything that didn't fit nicely into one of the other categories did fit into the cruciferous veggies or greens category. So yeah, this is actually kind of confusing. It's not as straightforward as I initially thought it was going to be when you're coming up with your own, because you do want to include diversity week over week. So if you're struggling with this, what I found really helpful is to just put one thing in for each of the categories, right? So one thing for the greens, one type of root, one cooking green, one vegetable fruit, one herb, and one edible flower, right? These last 2 categories you can kind of leave blank, just so you can get like a gauge on the price with these other elements above, and then go in and fill in the greens or the edible flowers to hit the $21 limit, the $20 limit. But yeah, from this portion, from the CSA shares, you then go into the CSA sample planner, or CSA planner, sorry, the CSA planner, and this is actually step 2, right? So the DTMs, this is just a lot of time, right? You just have to go through the crop list that we were given. So at the end of the workbook, we all have this crop list. and it gives us the variety of the crop that we're going to be growing, as well as the seed source. Um, since I'll be including this doc, you can use my DTMs, but if you do use the DTMs, make sure you verify them with what you found yourself. If there is an error, please let me know so that I can update my DTMs, and that others, if they do choose to use this doc, can also update their DTMs. I don't think this will be editable. Like I won't make this editable, but I'll change it myself if you find an error, because I'm not trying to misinform people. But yeah, this is stage 2 of the assignment, finding the DTMs. And then from stage 2, I think stage 3 is filling out this CSA planner, which is, yeah. So stage 3 is the CSA planner. So filling out the CSA planner is also one of those things that is just, it just takes time. So you look at your CSA shares, and you mark when you're gonna, or mark the items that you're going to be giving away that week. In my own CSA planner, I actually only put check marks next to, or under, or yeah, next to the crop if I was going to be giving it out that week. However, when we were working the CSA planner together, we just filled out every possible week that you could harvest. So chart, you can harvest every week. So we put, marks, check marks next or under each week. However, for me, when I was working through it the first time, it was very helpful not to do that, just so that I could see, okay, this week I'm gonna harvest this, so I need to start it at this point, right? Either or should work. I'm not 100% sure what they want in our submission with the application, and this can be a question that I may raise during the workshop, or someone else can raise, or if Daniel or Caleb watch this video, they can just let us know. But yeah, so the third part is just going through, knowing when you're gonna harvest the crop, and then setting your, direct sow or direct seed date, or the nursery date. And the reason I said this just takes time is because you just have to look through a calendar and count out weeks. It's not the most glamorous step, but I find it helpful. I find it helpful to go through and count each week, just so that you can kind of develop an intuition and understanding of how long it takes each crop to mature. A question that I do have are harvest windows. So the only question is with turnips, I think there's a discrepancy in the CSA planner that was given. So here are turnips, say 2 weeks, and then in the crop list, I believe turnips say 1 week, if we can find it. Yeah, it says once. So I'm not sure what the correct answer is there. And there's also a similar question for the greens. Arugula is included in one of the greens mixes. And looking up on Johnny's Seeds, it turns out you can harvest these greens anywhere from 1 to 3 times. I'm assuming this is largely based off of where you cut the green when you're harvesting it, and the quality of the soil, and maybe some other factors that I'm not aware of. But this is another question that we can pose as a group, or if someone has, more experience with this, they can shed some light on. After you finish the CSA planner, I think the next most useful step is going by hand and making calendars. So I have a bunch of calendars that are months here, right? So I have November. I have November through April, which is the last month of our CSA. I think it's 6 months. Yeah, it's 6 months, which is the duration of AgXposure. And I'm actually gonna do a super crude cut, and I'm gonna show you that tool. This isn't doing this by hand. Making a calendar is not required. The next part are calendars. So I have a calendar, like I mentioned, from November through, they're upside down, November through April. So we have the entire 6 months, and in each of these calendars, we're gonna be able to use these notes that we have. So like I mentioned, or I may have mentioned, in my example, just running through this, I do 7-day intervals and I choose Sunday to be the work day. This just makes it easier for planning and working with the dates that we have. And in each of these, we're going to transplant the information from our CSA planner to our calendar. So for example, you see the screen house, we're going to direct seed the tomatoes, and then prep beds. This is actually in the next step, but here we have moving the basil to the nursery, direct seeding the long beans, cucumbers into the screen house, moving the chard and kale to the nursery, pak choi to the nursery, and you continue to do this for each workday or for each task that you have scheduled in the CSA planner. So like here we see a full day, moving a lot of crops into the nursery, and then direct seeding a lot of other crops. One note too, that as you work through this, you'll see the ability to cluster crops is really helpful, and you can also see in the crop list suggestions. So it's recommended that we plant bush beans, beets, radish, and carrots together. It's also recommended that we plant arugula and the salad mix together. So as you work through your crop plan, as you work through your CSA shares, trying to figure out how to compress the amount of work into single days is something that's a little bit more fancy, a little bit more complicated, but it's something that's very much worth doing. Continuing on through the calendar, we see more nursery dates, and we also have transplant dates. So this is the second to last thing that I'll note in the calendars, but we have transplant dates. So this is when you move nursery items into the field. And then the last thing I wanted to note was marking the harvest days. This allows us to work through the bed planning and kind of see what days we're going to be taking things out of the soil. So this is important because when you're working through your bed plan, in the workbook, it's recommended that we have our beds grouped by things that go into the soil at the same time. And another option or another thing to consider is grouping things together that come out of the soil at the same time. So keep in mind this as well as you're working through your CSA shares or your crop plan, and as you're making your calendar. After you're making your calendar, this is the next thing that I found super helpful. Caleb recommended this, so shout out to Caleb for this idea. These cards are actually to scale. They're 5 inches long, so every inch is 2 feet. And I have a reference line here where 10 cards make the 100-foot bed. So, the way that I set this up is I made them to scale. That's the first thing. And then I made a card for every succession. So you'll see we have 2 successions of arugula, not in the sample, but that we can use. So I have 2 arugula cards. Or I have 2 salad mix cards here, 2 bush bean cards that you can see there. And this is really helpful in visualizing how the crops that we have are going to be going into the beds that we have. I'll work through an example showing how you can use the calendar and these cards to help you with your bed plan. I'm just gonna hop on the floor here, and using the calendar, we're gonna go through it and move the cards into the appropriate space. So we have screenhouse tomatoes, so we're gonna move the tomatoes to the screenhouse. Then we have prepping beds, that comes after. Nursery, basil. And here's another thing that is useful. So once we find basil, we'll make a queue with things that go into the nursery. So this basil will be the first thing in, and except with pak choi, which has 3 weeks in the nursery, which kind of messes up the queue. The first thing into the queue will be the first thing out of the queue. So we'll put basil into the queue. Then we have direct seeding long beans. So we'll find long beans and we can add them to one of the beds that we have. Then we move on, screenhouse the cucumbers. So screenhouse cucumbers, and nursery chard and kale. So we'll have our chard and kale cards, and we'll add these to our queue. Then we move on, nursery pak choi, So we take our pak choi, add it to the queue, and proceed. And here, nursery cauliflower, head lettuce, pak choi, and parsley. We also have flowers here. Flowers are something that I'm confused on because Daniel said, or the workbook says that the flowers will be communal. So I'm not 100% sure if we're solely responsible for this, but we can ask that question as a group, or I can ask it myself, however it works out. But I am confused there, so yeah, we're gonna add some more crops into the nursery. So here we have everything that's going into the nursery. So we're gonna add it, nursery queue, and then we're gonna direct seed. And like I was mentioning, this is really useful. The wind's blowing the cards. I'll move those when it's appropriate. But there is a recommendation that you plant the bush beans, the carrots, the beets, and radish together. So you might want to start this in one bed. Carrots are typically the longest one. I think bush beans are next. Radish, I think, are both 7 weeks. So like maybe this is a proper order that you'd want to have. And we also have edamame this week. So we'll move edamame at the top of a bed so that it can continuously receive water. You know, these are just ideas that you can work through. They might not be what you want to use. They might not be the best. But as you work through with the flashcards, you can kind of see where everything goes and work it out from there. I'll go through these next two examples because I think they're useful for seeing how the queue gets used. So here we have a nursery head lettuce. So add this to our queue, and then we transplant our basil. So in our queue, the first thing in is the first thing out. So we take our basil, and now we can add this to our beds. And then we proceed. All right, so now we add cilantro and bunching onions to our nursery queue. And then we're gonna be direct seeding the all-star mix. And this is another one. I think in the workbook, it's recommended that these roots, so the carrots, bush beans, beets, radish, and if I can find it, turnips, these should all be planted together. And I think it's also recommended that you plant your mixes with the arugula. And again, as you work through this bed planning activity, you can mess around with where you're placing things. And as you look at your harvest dates, you can see maybe I want to put these items together because they're going to be coming out at the same time, or you see, oh, all these items are going in at the same time, so it's better to put them in a new bed. Whatever works. But yeah, so we're directing the salad mix here. And then another example for the queue here, we're transplanting the chard, kale, and the pak choi. So we have our kale that we can transplant, our chard that we can transplant, and then we also have our pak choi. And it's just really effective to be able to pull the nursery cards out into the bed when you're transplanting them and just really see everything laid out in front of you. So yeah, hopefully as you work through this system, it can help you a little bit. And I'll go back to the computer screen for this last part. On the computer, if you made it through the video this far, thank you for bearing through the cuts. I hope it's been informational so far. The final portion of the AgXposure application, or our crop plan, is the bed plan. So looking at the workbook, this was just one of the examples that I went through with the flashcards. Once you finish going through your calendar, it's really easy to look at the flashcards and then see which crops are in each bed. So you just transfer the crops that are in each bed to the bed plan. And remember that we have, I think, 20 feet of screen house space available. So that's where the tomatoes and the cucumbers will go. If I'm wrong, please correct me. I don't want to be operating under a false assumption. I'm fairly certain it's 20 feet though. And yeah, I might just post a picture of the flashcards for the drawing and the crops and spacing in the diagram below because it's a 2-scale model. Otherwise, I think Excel would work well as well, if you're really good at Excel, or you can just do it by hand if you really enjoy drawing. But yeah, you just go through and you can refer back to your CSA plan to know when you direct seed or when you plant them into the nursery and transplant them. And yeah, that's the rest of the assignment. If you have any questions, again, please post them in the comments or post them in the conversation. I think the mark of understanding is based on how well you can respond to questions. If I did a poor job at articulating anything, I want to improve my ability to explain. If you have any critiques, anything that I missed, anything that I did wrong, anything that may be seen as misinformation, please do comment. Comment, post in the discussion. I'll make a note of it as well. I'll share these files, and yeah, hopefully someone was able to be helped. Hopefully someone can help me, and it's a win-win for everyone in the cohort. Happy crop planting, and I'll see you guys in the comments and the conversation, or on Wednesday. Radio, take care.